Hello everyone, welcome back to On the Fly. Today we're recapping Day 6 of the Men's World Championship happening here in Denmark and Stockholm, Sweden. So we'll hop into today, starting with, of course, the scores from today's game, starting with a 2-1 victory for Slovakia over France. Now, this was a very interesting game, and we talked about it yesterday. I made a bad prediction, and, whenever I make a prediction in these videos, it tends to completely do the opposite thing. So, for this game, it was one that I thought and I was expecting Slovakia to play a very good game. And credit to them, they did play a very good game today. But it wasn't to the expectation of what I was thinking was going to happen. And one of the things I was thinking was, for Slovakia, I thought it would be a game where you'd sort of see them, pick apart this French defense. And it was quite the opposite in this one, where we saw the French defense really play well and play their structured game, hurting Slovakia in just about every way. And then you think to the early parts of this game with the goal that got called off for France, and you think about how that goal would have went in. All of a sudden, that game is very different than what it was. So, for France today, as much as it's a loss, it's a momentum victory for them. And I think as much as now it sort of shows that they're probably not going to get to the quarterfinals, now it's about staying out of relegation. These are the kind of games that you want to build some momentum for before you head into obviously a tough game against Slovenia, where you're going to need a win in order to avoid being the team relegated. So for France, yes, not quite the result you might have been hoping for, but I think for the French, still a game you can definitely hold your head high on. And I think it's one that's continuing to build momentum. This French team has been a team at this tournament that I think has played well, in many ways well enough to win, just hasn't quite had the puck luck. But eventually, if you do it right long enough, eventually the results follow. So for France, obviously not the result you're hoping for, but still a well-played game. And for Slovakia, you sort of missed it, the early parts, and we'll talk about it more in the news with sort of what's going on with the Slovaks, but it's just their inability to score goals, which I think is going to become a very big problem for them at this tournament. And I think, you kind of look to some of their other games, and not necessarily the result of it, but how they're playing, and they're playing scared, and they're playing not their style of hockey, and it comes from a lot of them just missing talent. And I think in many ways, that's the reason why the Slovak team hasn't been where it's been. And I know in our preview we talked about, all the players left off the team, and we talked about it in the predictions, all the players left off the team, and we talked about it day one against Sweden, but all the players left off the team. And it's this consistent thing where the players left off the team are the reason why Slovakia is playing the way that they are, because they're just missing goal scorers, and they're missing their skilled players to put the puck in the back of the net like we've seen in years past. And you think about what's going on there when the Olympics roll around. This Slovakian team is going to be a very different one than what we're seeing at this tournament. So just something to keep an eye on there for the Slovaks. But still, a 2-1 victory to pick up a big 3 points in the standings. France will go empty-handed yet again. And that'll do it for our first game. We'll move to the second game of the day between Sweden and Latvia. And this was a game where we saw Latvia play a very good game through the first period. And then Sweden scores, and the game falls apart from there. And for Sweden, this was a game that in many ways I thought was a well-played game. And, you don't get frustrated by Latvia early. Obviously, you play a very good period in the first, but then you follow it up with an even better period in the second. Then you follow it up with an even better period in the third. And that's what I think we've been missing from Sweden, is that full 60-minute effort, but also an effort that's slowly but surely getting better and better throughout the game, where, with Sweden, they've sort of shown up, they've shown some downs, depending on which period they're playing. And I think today was a really good stepping stone for them for the rest of this tournament, to show that they can put together a full 60-minute effort, and a well-played one at that. For Latvia, just outskilled today. And, we talked about the same thing in the Canada game, and we'll talk about it in the news as well, but some games you're just not going to win. You're playing against a better team, and the better team comes to play. You're just not going to win that game. That's what happened today for Latvia. 6-0 loss against the Swedes. Sweden will take 3 points. Latvia, once again, with no points in this one. And now we'll move to the news, and we'll start here with France with Iihf stifled. And, this was a game for the French where you think about the early goal that got disallowed. Could that have changed the momentum in the game? Absolutely. And I think for France, it's been a tough tournament for them because they've done a lot of things right. They just had the results that have gone their way. And that's just been one of the unfortunate parts about this French team, is they've looked really good, but they just haven't had the results to show for it. And I think, the better France continues to play, eventually the results will follow. And I think there's a certain game that they need to win, right, against Slovenia, that I think will really be one that I think a lot of people will keep their eyes on, especially when it comes to relegation, where you'll see the two teams playing for their lives. Be interesting to see if France sort of turns their game around and finally gets that puck luck they've been deserving for so long. As for Slovakia, with this team, and this team has been worse than I would have expected coming into this tournament, and not necessarily in the fact that, they're still winning hockey games, and I don't want to take away from that, but this team on paper coming into this tournament did not look great. And they followed it up with their play, and then they followed up with another game. And it's just this consistent problem of not having their skilled play, like their top end talent that very well could have been there, I think has cost them dearly at this tournament. But for Slovakia, just a tough tournament for them so far, and we'll see if they're able to pick up their game. They're still right where they need to be, right? They've won the games that they needed to. Now it's just a matter if they can close it out and win and sort of go on a heater, especially towards the end of into this preliminary play, because then it's on them to sort of find their way into the quarter. So for Slovakia, a tough win today. Obviously, you never complain about 3 points in the standings, but those are the games you want to find your groove and score and win and score by a lot more. So for Slovakia today with this team, then to Sweden we go with finding gaps. This was a Swedish performance today that I was really impressed by, and it was that full 60-minute effort that I think we haven't seen at this tournament from them. So for Sweden, well played game today against Latvia. Latvia never had a chance, which now brings us to Latvia with another wash. And this was a game that I think you're just going to try and flush, right, for Latvia. This game coming in was a penciled-in loss. Same game against Canada, it was a penciled-in loss. Whether you win or lose that game doesn't matter. Obviously, you'd like to win every game you can, but you can appreciate that you're probably not going to win against those teams in the round robin without a hot goaltender or some kind of miracle, which is that's just part of this tournament. But for Latvia today, it's about finding positives, and I think you can definitely draw some positives. I'm not going to say there was a lot of them, but you can draw some positives from this game and bring it forward. So for Latvia, it's about flushing this one, forgetting about it, moving on to the next one, because for this team, still lots of hockey to play. And I think for Latvia at this tournament, quarterfinals are still very much in sight. So don't be surprised to see Latvia, make their mark at this tournament. When I'll talk about Group B, and we'll start here with a 5-1 victory for the USA over Norway. They went up early in this one, and they never looked back. Oh, boy. Yeah, I know the US blew another lead. And I don't know. I just don't know. And, you're the US team against Norway, where love Norway, and all credit to Norway in this comeback. And you can already see the smile coming as we talk about another U.S. choke. But for the U.S. in this game, it was just a disaster. And you get up to a 5-1 lead, and you find a way to cough it up. And not even the way they coughed. Like, where I draw a lot of problems from is not the fact that they did cough it up. It was the way they coughed it up. It was mistakes at the blue line, giveaways in your own end. Sloppy hockey. And I think sloppy hockey is the best way to describe this U.S. team today. And it was abysmal. Frankly, it was abysmal. And you give chances to a team like Norway, they're going to find the back of the net. And you saw Norway find the back of the net on just about every chance the U.S. gave them. So for Norway today, a very well-played game. And as much as you go down early, the ability to battle back, I think, is something you're going to see carry through the rest of this tournament. You look to, sort of the path out for Norway, where right now they're fighting for their spot in the relegation game. And it's all going to come down to their game against Hungary, which is all of a sudden their game that matters. And I think for Norway, they need that momentum to beat a team like Hungary. And I think today is the kind of game that you're looking at where you stole a point from the U.S., which makes your path out a lot easier now. Now it's just a matter if you can convert. So, for Norway in this game, well played. For the U.S., you still get the win somehow. You still get the win. But one that I think they're going to go back to the room and think a lot about. And not just the fact that they nearly lost this game, but the fact that they blew a 5-1 lead to Norway at the Iihf Men's Worlds is never something that you really want to be doing. But that will do it for our first game. Now to the second game with Denmark against Kazakhstan. And this was a game that I was curious to see. And curious in the sense that, for the Danes, this tournament has been one that has started very rough for them. Part of the scheduling, that's just how it's been, right? Where you've played against the best teams at this tournament in Group B, so you're gonna get spanked, and that's just gonna be how it works, right? You're gonna get spanked early on, and then you're gonna find your groove, especially towards and find your winning ways for the playoffs. And part credit to the schedulers, I guess. Where obviously, it's one that I think could be a good strategy if it works. But I do think for Denmark, this was the game that they needed to win, and must-win game in many ways to keep your quarterfinal hopes alive, and they did that. And for the Danes, 5-1 victory. You had the empty net at the end where Kazakhstan pulls their goalie late in the game, despite really not having a chance in the game. They finally got burnt on that one today. So in the eventual case of a 3-way tie, it could be interesting. So for Kazakhstan, it was one that I wasn't a huge fan of. The game they played today was decent. I thought after, the Danes go up, all of a sudden it all falls apart for Kazakhstan, where they start making mistakes. I think their goaltender had a tantrum in the net where you saw him start slamming his stick. But, for the Kazakhs, it's a game that you need to find a point. And you are currently running out of ways to find that point, because for Kazakhstan, they're the team on the chopping block in many ways. Norway might be the team right now in the relegation spot, but in a couple days when Norway plays Hungary, it will likely end up being a team like Kazakhstan in the relegation spot. So for the Kazakhs, looking for any point to get themselves ahead of Hungary, because I think Hungary at this tournament is probably done for points. Obviously, that could change, but just the way they stack up, I'm getting the sense that that's probably going to be what it's going to happen, but something that could very well change. So lots of hockey still to play left at this tournament. Don't be surprised to see some fireworks fly. So we'll move now to the news, and we'll start here with 4-3-2-1, and we'll start here with Norway. With the 4 goals down, the 5-1 comeback game. It's something that I think Norway in a couple days will look back and say, thank goodness we ended up coming back in this game, because it saved our skins instead of having to worry about the Norway or the Kazakhstan tiebreaker in the relegation game. Could be interesting in that one. Then to the U.S. we go with 3 points. Well, not really 3 points. It was 2 points today. And in this tournament, we've seen teams struggle. And, the 2 points has been sort of a consolation prize. You think about the France-Finland game where Finland battles back right at the very end, gets the 2 points. It's not one of those games that you're overly proud of, but you still get the 2 points anyway. And I think in this game for the U.S., it was very much similar, where you get the 2 points, yay, you're a winner, but that extra point might come in handy, especially when you look at what's going on in that group. Something to very much keep an eye on, because that could turn very quickly on its head, especially with the loss already to Switzerland. You could find the U.S. being the 3rd spot or even the 4th spot, depending on what happens with Germany. This tournament could very quickly turn on its head if the U.S. continues to play games like this, especially when they're leading, because you give teams a chance to get back in. Denmark especially, Norway especially, they're going to bury it. So for the U.S. today, 3 points, turns to 2, and then to Kazakhstan with a second miracle, which is what they're going to need to get themselves out. And unfortunately, it's got to this point now where Kazakhstan's going to need a Hail Mary play and scrounge up a point from somewhere, where it's very much looking, especially with the Norway point today against the USA, that they're going to have a problem. So Norway needs a point in some capacity over their next couple games. We'll see if they're able to get that, but one that I am not very confident that they'll find. Then the last one here for the news for Denmark with one path to the quarterfinal, and that is to win. And for Denmark, it's a tournament that they're on home ice. I think they very much have a shot to make the quarterfinals now. I just don't know if they're going to be able to win their games that matter. And I think, you look at what they're going to come up against. Norway, I don't think is going to be a slouch, especially if they're playing for their tournament lives with this extra point where they're trying to win the game in regulation. That's one I'm definitely keeping an eye on, because I originally had that game, I think, going to overtime or a shootout in our predictions, but it's going to be a tight game. These two teams are very evenly matched. We've seen Norway play some really good games at this tournament, keeping teams that they probably shouldn't have to 1-goal games. We've seen the comeback today. I just think Norway is a team at this tournament that's going to be a very tough beat, and as much as they might not be competing themselves for a quarterfinal spot, especially after what they've kind of been through, it wouldn't surprise me to see them put an upset into Denmark. So for Denmark, their path to the quarterfinal is to win. They need to win basically out if they want a shot to make it. But time, of course, will tell on that one. We'll now talk about the standings. And speaking of the standings, we'll see here in Group A with Sweden in first place with 12 points, Canada in second with 9, Slovenia in third with 7, Latvia in fourth place with 6, Finland in fifth with 5, Austria in sixth with 2, France in seventh with 1, and Slovenia with 3 regulation losses in last place in Group A. Then to Group B, we will go with Germany in first place with 9, Czechia in second with 8, US in third with 8, Switzerland in fourth place with 7, Hungary in fifth with 3, Denmark in sixth place with 3, Kazakhstan in seventh place with 3. Remember that Hungary does have the tiebreaker over Kazakhstan, and then Norway with the tiebreaker, and I rephrase that as well, that both Hungary and Denmark have the tiebreaker over Kazakhstan. Remember today's game as well, with Hungary winning the other day. And then Norway in last place with 1 point. Remember, the bottom 2 teams in each group will be relegated at this tournament. But the one thing I do want to draw some attention to today, we've spent a lot of time in the standings in Group B, and we're going to continue that with the game with Norway. And I think this Norway game is one that is very important. And, for Norway, when they play Denmark, the way that these standings are going to work is that if Norway can find the regulation win, or if they beat Hungary, all of a sudden Kazakhstan's that team on the bottom. And I think that's one that it really wouldn't surprise me to see that happen. And I think for Kazakhstan now, they're a team that are scrounging for any points they can find, and they're going to be playing some pretty good teams to try and get there. It's a very tough road for them. They basically need Norway to not win any of their games and not scrounge up a way to get the 3 points. So unfortunately for Kazakhstan, it's looking a little bit grim, but in the same respect, they've looked decent, and it's not even, and they've pulled some upsets off against teams they probably shouldn't have in the past. Now it's just a matter if they can find the game that matters for them now, because they lost their real game that matters, right? They lost against Hungary. That was their game. That was the game they needed to win. They didn't do so. Now it's scramble time for them to try and get out of the relegation spot. So that'll do it for our standings part. We'll now move to tomorrow's games. May the 15th. We'll start here at 10:20 a.m. Eastern Time between Finland and Slovenia. This is a game that, honestly, I know it's going to end up happening, right, where, that this is going to go down right to the wire and Slovenia is going to win in overtime. But I can't not take Finland by quite a margin in this game. Slovenia is a team that plays a very defensive style. Finland's a team that plays a very defensive style. It's going to come down to which team makes more mistakes, and whether it's Finland, whether it's Slovenia, I think both teams have shown themselves to be able to sort of take games at this tournament. And Slovenia hasn't had their win yet, but I think they're getting closer. And I think, we've looked at the way Finland's played. I think especially against France, where they kind of took a little bit of a nap and they made some bad mistakes that ended up in the back of their net. Don't be surprised to see this game be similar. And I think the differences between Slovenia and France aren't that different. And I think they're very similar, especially in the way they play. So if you're looking at, can history repeat itself? I very much do think it can. And it would not surprise me in the slightest to see a Slovenia upset in this one. Although I will admit that I expect Finland to win. But Slovenia is a team that has the ability to win this game. So don't count out Slovenia. That's going to be your game of the day in Group A. The other game, 2:20 p.m. Eastern time between Austria and Canada. I don't think it's going to be a game like last year. Remember back, Canada blew a 5-goal lead in the third, very similar to the U.S., but all in the third period, and I think this game's going to be a little bit different, and one of the reasons why is you look at Canada's roster, top to bottom. They are stacked this year, much better than last year's team. Austria fielding a relatively similar team from last year. Yes, Austria's look good, especially against some of the better teams at this tournament. I just don't think they have the power in them to beat Canada, at least not yet. But give it a couple years and they'll be knocking on the door. But still, Austria's played well. The way this tournament's gone and the way my predictions have gone, especially in these videos, you never really know, but I will say that I expect Canada to win this one, and I would also expect Finland to win this one, although I will admit I think that Finland game is going to be a very tight margin, and it wouldn't surprise me to see that game go to OT. We'll now move to Group B, where we'll see the game of the day between Switzerland and Germany. This game has been circled on my calendar for the last couple days, and we've seen Germany at this tournament progressively get better and better and better, and you add Tim Stützle for Germany, and you see Switzerland on the other side, where they've looked better and better and better, and they beat the U.S., and all of a sudden, Germany a little bit untested in terms of the top teams at this tournament. Switzerland gone through the gauntlet, pushing to overtime against the Czechs, where they led twice in that game. They beat the U.S. Now it's up to the Swiss to see what they really can do at this tournament, and it would not surprise me in the slightest to see the Swiss make, or actually either team, make a real push in this game and fight their way to obviously a quarterfinal spot, and a higher quarterfinal spot at that, where right now you have the ability for both Germany and Switzerland to be fighting for that first and second spot in Group A. You'd much rather play a team like Finland, or you'd much rather play a team like Latvia or Slovakia or Austria than you would Canada or Sweden, especially in the quarterfinals. Guarantee yourself a chance to play for a medal. Always something to keep an eye on, especially in Group B, where that division is tightening up, and very similar to that Group A, where you kind of have your two teams who are slowly but surely moving away from the rest with Canada and Sweden. Now it's about, who's going to fill in that fourth spot in Group A. So Switzerland, Germany, it's going to be a good game. I don't have a prediction. I think it's going to be a tight game, but I also wouldn't be surprised to see the Swiss run away with it. I think the longer the game goes close, the more it favors Germany, but the sort of, if Switzerland can get out to an early lead, that's where you're going to see Germany struggle a little bit more. So for Switzerland, look for them to get out to the early lead. For Germany, look for them to keep it close. It's going to be a good one. Definitely your game of the day for both groups, but especially in Group B. That's going to be your game of the day. And then we'll go to Czechia and Hungary at 2:20 p.m. Eastern time. I don't think it's going to be that great of a game. Not as good as the 10-20 games will be, or the 10-20 game will be. And honestly, both 10-20 games will be. I think, you look at Finland and Slovenia, be a good one as well. But Czechs and Hungary, I expect a Czech blowout in this one. Just the way Hungary's played, especially against some of the better teams at this tournament, they got their win. They got the win they needed against Kazakhstan. Now it's up to fate to let it decide whether or not Hungary has a shot to get out of the relegation game and keep up at the top division at the IIHF World Championships. Made this far in the video. Thank you for watching. Please drop a like if you're subscribing. Tell all your friends, comment down below your thoughts on Day 6 of the Men's World Championship. Until next time.